So I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Leslie Bartlett, and I'm the faculty director for the Institute for Regional and International Studies at UW-Madison. I really want to thank those of you who have joined us today. It's such a tumultuous day and so much going on. I feel like my attention is continuously being pulled in multiple directions. And I was just thinking as we sat here waiting for everybody to log on that this is probably the only moment of silence I've had in my day. So it's a little Zoom meditation, if you will. But I love this book. I am fascinated by the content, and we're really, really lucky and delighted to have with us today the author of the book for our book club, Dr. Mathanji Subramanian. Thank you so much, Mathu, for being here with us. Mathu is an award-winning writer and educator. She's a former public school teacher and a senior policy analyst with the New York City Council. She's also worked extensively with Sesame Workshop, where she's assistant vice president. Her work has appeared in many sources like Al Jazeera, Washington Post, Ms. Magazine, among others. She's received fellowships to support her work, including the Fulbright Nehru Senior Scholarship and a Jacob Javits Fellowship. And interestingly enough, as you probably read in the beginning of this book resulted from ethnographic fieldwork that she completed earlier. This novel, People's History of Heaven, hope you have your well-thumbed copy in front of you, is a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award and the PFC Valley of Words Awards, and it was long-listed for several prizes and has been named as an honor book for Skipping Stones. So please join me in welcoming Mathu. We can't wait to hear from you about your lovely book. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. So I have to just start by saying that this book was a result of an ethnography, and I basically used everything I learned in Leslie's class when I was her grad student. Like, we were just calculating 15 years ago. So this book wouldn't have been possible without Leslie. So I'm always honored to come to a book club, but I'm especially honored to be here today. So what I was planning on doing with everybody today is, I know a lot of you are educators, so I was gonna do a writing workshop that can be used with this book and like a lot of different books that hopefully you guys can use in your classroom. I have done it with sort of 6th through 12th graders, but I think it's pretty easily adapted to elementary as well. So does that sound good to everybody? Yeah, I see nods of people who have their cameras on. Okay, so just to start, I just wanted to say a couple of things. My book is about stolen land, so I always start my workshops with a land acknowledgement. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Denver, Colorado, which is the ancestral unceded territory of the Arapaho, Sioux, Cheyenne, and Navajo people. And that Madison, Wisconsin is the unceded ancestral territory of the Sioux, Winnebago, Peoria, Kickapoo, Sauk, and Meskwaki people. I also, just building on what Leslie said, I just want to acknowledge that we're in the middle of an unprecedented time politically. And many of us who have sort of a history with white supremacy and patriarchy in particular are feeling kind of triggered today and kind of scared. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we're in this very weird space right now, and just encourage you to do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. And also say, like, if you can't concentrate today, if you can't work today, it's okay. And if you can't concentrate on this, it's okay. You have the handouts there, and Leslie knows how to get in touch with me if you guys have any questions. So I'm hoping that this can be sort of a respite from the news. But you know, if anyone feels like they need to move away or take care of themselves, please do that. Does that sound good? Yeah? Okay, great. So thank you guys so much for reading my book. My book is about place. My book is very rooted in place. So it takes place in Bangalore in India. And so the writing workshop we're going to do today is how to write about place. And one of the things that helps an author sort of root somebody in a story is by using multi-sensory details. So invoking your sense of like touch, smell, hearing, sight, and taste. So we're going to do an exercise today in which we're going to sort of look at some pieces of work that do that. And then we're going to try and write a little sketch of a place ourselves. Sounds good? All right. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. So since, and this handout that I'm sharing, this is in, you guys have a link to this. So if you're more comfortable looking at the link from the Google Drive and not the screen, it's fine. It's exactly the same thing. So what we're going to do first is we're going to read this poem, which is about India, and it's called Where I'm From. And if I was doing this in a classroom in person, I would have students go around and read, like everybody read a line. I have tried that on Zoom and it is a disaster. So I'm just going to read to you guys today. But if I was doing this in a classroom, I would have everybody participate. So this poem is by Shikha Malavia. Shikha is, she lives in the US now, but she's actually from Bangalore. And this is about India, and it's from her collection, Geography of Tongues, by the Great Indian Poetry Collective. So the poem is called Where I Come From. My country is rough silk. My country is smooth spice. My country is black silver. My country is blue ice. My country is lotus temple. My country is golden mosque. My country is brick church. My country is glass synagogue. My country is tame elephant. My country is hungry tiger. My country is jumping monkey. My country is scuttling spider. My country is scented flower. My country is smelly dung. My country is ahimsa. My country is loaded gun. My country is every manifestation between a fiery red chili pepper and your tongue, a peacock dancing against the setting sun. Okay, so let's just start by having a conversation about this poem. So I'm gonna, you can either answer in the chat or Carmen, is it okay if we let people unmute themselves? Because I think the group is small enough that we can do that. So I'd like to know what you thought about this poem, how it felt when you heard it. What do you notice about it? What do you like? What do you dislike? So you can either answer in the chat or you can unmute.
I like the repetition of the term my country.
Great, thank you. So this is actually, the format of this poem is called a list poem. And in a list poem, as Priyanka pointed out, every single line starts with the same stem. So it starts with my country is. There's several types of list poems, but this is one type of list poem. And it doesn't have to be in couplets. It can be, you know, there's different ways that you can do it. And it usually ends with some kind of coda in which the rhythm is broken. So you can see here, it's my country is, my country is, my country is, and this my country is. The poet has changed the number of syllables per line, she's changed the number of lines. And so there's actually a visual change in the poem. And this is supposed to be sort of like the wrapping up of the poem. So that's how a list poem works. Priyanka or somebody else, can you talk about why you liked the repetition or didn't like the repetition? Why did that work for you? Or did it not work for somebody? Because that's okay too. Go ahead, Priyanka, I saw you on mute, go ahead.
I think it brings home every single line, like what the author is talking about, that she is talking about her country, or her home, which is where she comes from. And I think it really, it's very representative of the purpose of the poem.
Nice, thank you. So that repetition is often, so list poems, often poems about home are list poems. So this repetitive element reinforces what's being talked about. Does anyone notice anything about the couplets? Go ahead, Fernando.
Aren't the couplets focusing on a sense, like one sense at a time?
That's great, yes. So we have rough silk and smooth spice. So you have this rough and smooth, but you'll notice that not only are a lot of the couplets opposites, like this rough and smooth, but the poet also plays with what counts as the sense, right? Because silk is rough, you can touch silk, but spice is actually a taste, right? But she's using an adjective that has to do with touch. So poets often do that. They play sort of between the senses to make you think about things differently. And there's a few examples of opposites here. So you have scented flower and smelly dung. Ahimsa is a Gandhian term, and it means a lack of violence. So it means peaceful. And then loaded gun. So this is another opposite here. How do the opposites work? Like, how do you feel like they work in the poem? Do you like them? Do they confuse you? And why do you think the poet made that choice? Yeah, go ahead, Fernando.
I feel like she made that choice. Well, like Leslie said in the chat just now. Good call there, Leslie. Juxtapositioning, because showing only one side of it would make too biased of an opinion, but showing both sides would be more honest.
Nice, that's great. So she's trying to be, so you feel like she's trying to be objective, maybe?
Yes.
Okay. Another thing she might be trying to do is to talk about, India is a place that's full of contradictions, right? So in an attempt to be unbiased, I feel like she's also sort of showing all the different contradictions. I'm going to stop my share for just a second because there's a lot happening in the chat that I'm missing because my screen doesn't let me see both. So I just want to point out things here. The use of repetition, the use of senses. I can taste and smell it. Great. Someone says, I feel it would be useful today. Can someone, was that about the poem or was that unmuting themselves? Smith, if you could clarify.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it made me think of how well it would help us to express our feelings, like right now, today, with everything that's happening to us in our place.
Oh, I see what you're saying, because it's a poem about our country, right?
Yes.
Nice. I love that. Yeah. And we live in a place of contradictions too, right? And opposites. It's beautiful and evocative. Yeah, Leslie, I actually sometimes teach this George L. Lyon poem where I'm from along with this poem. But since I figured you guys have probably all taught it before, I brought a different poem to pair it with. And since the book is about India, I wanted to, do some South Asian poets. There's a great variety of description and it's simple but powerful. I like the rhythm. I felt like I could relate. That's great. The rhyming, it creates a good feeling of dichotomy and it allows a lot to happen in a small space in few words. Okay, so there's been a couple of comments about the language itself. And Deborah, I see you. Give me just 1 second. One thing about poems and that I think is really great to read as a writer or as a teacher is that poets are very efficient with language because they have so little space. So every word they pick is very, very exact. So sometimes with writing students, whether they're high school students or older students, I do an exercise where I just have them brainstorm as many verbs as they can. And then their assignment is to write without adjectives. And then when you do that, when you can only write with verbs and no adjectives, you have to pick very, very specific words to drive the action. And if you're looking for examples of how people do that, poets are often really great examples. Deborah, you had your hand up. Can you go ahead?
Sure. I just wanted to share that for me also, building on what other people have been saying, the parallelism that's yet also founded in the paradoxes reminds me of the lotus, the symbol of the lotus that's so powerful in India, and how something so beautiful and strong can come from the depths of the mud. And I just kind of felt this overall symbolism and presence. That's all I just wanted to share.
I love that. Thank you. And there's actually a lotus in the poem referring to the famous lotus temple in Delhi. Yeah, and it is also interesting, one reason that I try to, when I do writing exercises, I try to use South Asian poets is that when you have poets who are writing about a place that they're not from, there's sometimes this lack of empathy there. And I think for a lot of countries from the global South, we rarely read the words of authors and writers who come from that place. And it's a very different experience to read someone's take on their own home. That's not to say that they'll ignore the problems that are happening there, right? Like we have Ahimsa and loaded gun here, but it is maybe a more nuanced approach than you would get from another writer. Does anyone have anything else they want to add, or shall we go ahead and read the next poem? I'm going to stop sharing so I can just see. Are we good to go to the next poem? Yeah? Okay. Okay. So this next poem is actually takes place in the United States. It's called 12-12-12, and it's by Amy Narukumatathil, which I always have to look at her name to pronounce it, even though I'm from the exact same part of India that she's from. And this is a beautiful poem, and she's half Indian and half Filipina. And this is a beautiful poem about the place she lived when she was 12. This is also a list poem, but you'll see it's a very, very different kind of list. Okay, so this poem is called 12-12-12. A. When I was 12, I lived on the grounds of a mental asylum. B. My Filipino mother was a psychiatrist in the doctor's quarters, one of the 3 big brick houses that edged the institute. C. My younger sister and I practiced herkies, our favorite cheerleading jumps, off the patient's bleachers near the softball field. D. When I was 12, I aced the experiments with celery and food coloring. They let me skip a whole grade and get right to the dissections. E. I secretly wished my supply of grape bubble yum would never run out, but I couldn't figure out how to blow bubbles and snap the lavender gum like Sarah could. F. We sold gift wrap and crystals for a junior high fundraiser, and my mom still asks, where are all the crystals I bought, and why don't you display them in your house? G. When I was 12, I worried about the darkening hair on my legs. My mother bought me my first training bra, no cup, just little triangle pieces stitched together, and then a slice of New York style cheesecake to bring home. H, home. I, when I was 12, our house always smelled of fried lumpia or ginger. J, we had zinnias as wide as my outstretched hand nodding at us in our garden. K, my school had to create a whole new bus stop just for my sister and me, and everyone stopped talking and stared when we stepped onto the bus each morning, smelling of grape gum and ginger roots. L, just who are these girls? I love this poem so much, but it's okay if you don't love it. You can tell me if you don't love it. So what did you guys think? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? What did you notice, especially in terms of multisensory kind of details? And you also don't have to raise your hand. You could just talk.
I've never seen list poetry before, but I'm not surprised that it exists. Yeah.
So what do you think of list poetry? Do you like it? Do you dislike it?
It sounds, I mean, it reminds me of free writing. I don't know if that would be called prose poetry.
Mm-hmm.
It's just organized in lists of, it's kind of like that prompt of, give me 12 things you remember from this time in your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
But the way she wrote it was intentionally poetic. So I guess, you know, that's like each piece. There's a story behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. One of the reasons I like teaching list poems is I think people, I mean, of all ages get really scared of poetry and feel like they can't do it. But like everyone can make a list, right? So, and like, I mean, this is just a list, but the way Amy has structured it is really beautiful, right? So the order she's put things in, right? That she started with, you know, when I was 12, I lived in a mental asylum, and she ends with just who are these girls? She's got a callback here to grape gum from the bubble yum area here. She's got a callback to ginger roots from the fried lumpia, which is, where is it? Right here, right? So the order she's put things in is very, it's very intentional, and that's sort of what separates, one of the things that separates it from being just a list and being called a poem. Other people have thoughts?
It just made me kind of think of it. Is it Sandra Cisneros, that 11 that she talks about how you build on your life? Made me think about that. I like that too.
Yeah, that's great. And then Sandra Cisneros is, I don't remember if it's a poem or a short from House on Mango Street, but she talks about how she's still 11, even when she's in her 50s, she's like still 11, that 11-year-old is still inside of her. That's a really great connection to this poem. Okay, I'm seeing something in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. I wonder what the crystals are about. Leslie, I don't know if you had to do this, but in elementary school, I actually had to I'm not trying to leave the meeting. I'm trying to share my
Yeah,
screen.
we had to sell things, but I just wonder, like, clearly the mom bought them and they're not around. And I wonder,
Right.
yeah, what that's
Oh, so you're
about.
like, what happened to them in all those years? I love this line too, because the other thing I really love about this poem, which is Leslie sort of referring to here, is if you're a certain generation, you remember selling wrapping paper, you remember bubble yum, right? And you remember the taste of bubble yum, and you remember selling crystals. So really good place poems are also rooted in time. I have a 12-year-old girl, and it just resonates loudly with what she thinks, feels, worries about to date, less poetic and more personal. I'm curious about the structure. Are the letters meant to organize it as a response, or do they have to do with her mother's profession? And I love that there are 12 sections. Okay, so let me address all of these. The 12 sections I actually never even noticed until somebody pointed out in my last workshop, and it is brilliant. There are 12 sections for 12, 12, 12. The letters are a really interesting choice. They also made me sort of think of multiple choice questions, just because, I don't know, of the teaching background. Or like an outline that you might make in school, like you're taking notes about someone. But it does point out that when you're doing list poem, you don't just have to do the repeated. I mean, she repeats when I was 12, but she doesn't do it every single time, right? There's lots of ways to sort of make a list. And then really being in the 12-year-old's persona. So this is something that I teach in memoir classes, and would probably be interesting to some of you here if you're also writers. One thing that we talk about when we write about our pasts is having two characters. There's the character of your past self, and then there's the character of yourself looking back on what happened. And that's the narrator. That's the person who's actually telling the story. So I feel like in these memories, you can feel both Amy when she was 12 and the Amy who's telling you this now. And I think that's such a hard thing to do in a poem. And I think she does it so beautifully. It's one place, but it's like two time periods at once. And I'm sorry if that was like too much, but I just think it's really cool. And I thought some of you might appreciate it too. Okay. And this one also uses juxtaposition. Leslie, do you want to talk more about that? Where do you see juxtaposition?
I just feel like she talks about, she has this sense of like her home life and then her peer life, right?
Mhm.
Like, so everybody's stopping to see these girls. Who are these girls? The bubblegum versus the ginger. I don't know. There seems to be some juxtaposition. The Herkies.
Yeah.
There seems to be juxtaposition throughout.
Yeah, I like that. And it's, I mean, the Herkies, when you think about Herkies, that's like a leap where you like stick your legs out and I can't do it, but you stick your legs out and touch them. And I'm not going to do it now on a Zoom call even if I could. But there's such freedom and movement in that compared to being scrutinized on a bus, right? So she's also got some very sort of different, and then, you know, even Bubble Yum and Lumpia, like Bubble Yum is such an American thing. And Lumpia is not from the US, but it's happening in the US, so it is American, right? So those contradictions are really great. Okay, you guys ready to do some writing? Yeah? Okay, so this again is something that you can do with your students as well. So let me share my screen one more time. So we're gonna start with a pre-writing exercise. So in your packets, you have a chart like this that just lists the 5 senses. And if you don't have your packet with you, normally in workshops, I just make people sort of write this across the top of the paper. So you write sights, sounds, smells, touches, feels, and tastes. Now, what we're gonna do is wherever you are sitting, you are gonna spend the next 5 minutes brainstorming as many of these as you possibly can in the room where you are. Now, if there's no food in the room, think about times when you've eaten in the room or what other kinds of tastes come to mind. If people are interested in doing this with their classes, when I do this in a classroom, I do like a chalk talk. So I put up 5 big, huge pieces of chart paper, like that posted chart paper, and I write sight, sound, smells on each one. So you have a sight chart paper, you have a sound one, you have a smell. And then I give everybody a marker, and everybody has to be silent. And they have to write, they have to go between the papers and write, which is great if you have a class that like needs to be moving. It's really good to try and keep them silent, but if you don't necessarily have a class that you can keep silent based on the age level, that's okay too. Okay, so you guys have 5 minutes and your job right now is to fill in this chart. So in the room you're sitting in, brainstorm as many sights, sounds, smells, touches, feels, and tastes as you can. Feel free to turn off your camera. I'm going to stop sharing now and put the prompt in the chat, and we'll come back at 4 o'clock. You have about 1 minute left. Okay, so wrap up the thought you're on. So normally at this point, I would have students share what they came up with, or we would look at the chart papers around the room and read some of the phrases that came out. We talk about how it felt. I think that's really important when you're doing writing exercises. Did this feel difficult? Did it feel good? Did it feel, how did it feel to you? But since we have limited time, we're gonna move straight into the next exercise, which is to write a list poem using the details you brainstormed. So I'm going to give you guys 7 minutes to do this. You can play with form like Amy does in 12, 12, 12, or you can do it more like Shika's poem, where you have a stem like my home, my classroom, this room, or whatever room that you're in. I'm just going to see it as well. Oops. And so does everyone feel clear about what you have to do? So we're going to write a list poem using the details you just brainstormed. Got it? Okay. If you arrived late, if you go back to, I'm going to just repaste the link that has all the handouts, and then I'll also share that first poem as well. So here's the link to the handouts. And then I'll put it on the screen. It's now, well, for you guys, it's 4:01. So you have until 4:08. Okay? Everyone know what they need to do? Okay, great. Feel free to turn your camera off if it's easier to write that way. take about 1 more minute. Okay, go ahead and finish the thought you're on. And then let's talk a little bit about how that went for you. How did that feel to write? Does anyone want to share any lines they're particularly proud of? How'd it go? And you can share in the chat too. I hate reading my work aloud, so I like sharing in the chat. So if you want to put a line in the chat, that's cool too.
I just want to say I'm not a writer at all, and I haven't written a poem since I was probably 12, and that you made this like so easy, and it just like was just like a very powerful experience. I wrote about my dog, but that's just like something silly, but I just want to say thank you so much. Like feeling really good.
Thank you. Well, thank you. That makes me feel really good. I'm so glad. I'm really glad. Oh, good. I'm glad people are having fun with it. That's great. Yeah, and you know what? Democracy is crumbling. So if you need to be creative, this is a great way to be creative. Like write poems, good or bad. This is the time. I mean, in all seriousness though, like your words matter more now than ever. So this is the time if you're going to start writing for sure. Oh, we have some. Do people feel okay about me reading this out loud? These out loud that you put in the chat? Let's see. Yes, and sure. Okay, cool. I want to work on revisions now. Yay. Whoever wants to work on revisions. That's like the biggest compliment. Okay, 11 things on the artist's desk before class begins. I already love the title and love this poem. 1, wig stuffed in the top bookshelf, clown wig, Diana Ross curly phase, Viking hat, and a silly headband with dancing fluorescent green tubes that light up. A painted plastic dinosaur with a birthday hat, 2 clown noses, an eye descent menorah with an RBH shamash, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, a rainbow flag, wearing a flouncy blouse made from painted bottle caps, a Mexican skeleton plays a tiny trumpet, sounds of fingers on a keyboard, sounds of an invisible timer, cold, the heat is on but doesn't reach this room, it tastes like blueberries, I love that, scratchy wool sweater, an empty 4 p.m. smoothie cup, purpling berry and spinach pulp down its sides. Beautiful. I love this. I especially love the last one because it's a smoothie cup and I can feel the texture of the spinach pulp and I can taste it and I can smell it and I can feel like the cold sides. Beautiful. I love this. Okay, next one. My workspace is crisp paper under my pen. Ooh, I love that word, crisp. My workspace is a Sisyphus circling a mountain each minute. My workspace is the drumming of a second hand. Wow, amazing. And I love that last line too, because I think of you drumming your hand, and then I also think of the clock. There's like so many different ways that you can interpret that last line. Oh, thanks, nice in my voice. I'm sure it'd be beautiful in your voice too, but I totally get that you don't want to, if people don't want to read their work aloud. Does anyone else want to share a poem or even just a line that you're super proud of?
Sure, I can share. So friendly science teacher here. I haven't written creatively, do lots of technical writing, but this is a challenge for me. So I'm home with my 4 children. So my home is grimy handprints like growth charts on the wall. My home smells like stinky feet from sizes big and small. Remains from last night's dinner glaze my table with their crunch. My home smells of the warming oven preparing to feed my hungry bunch.
Sounds a lot like my house. I love that. And the oven one again is great because it's warmth, it's heat, and it's also smell and also taste. You guys just rock this. That's amazing. Wonderful. Okay, so before I open it up to questions, I just wanted to read you a really small paragraph from the book. It's just 1 paragraph, and I'm reading it to you because it's a description of the slum on the day that the bulldozers are arriving. So if you haven't read the book, sorry, I have the hardcover. I know you guys have the paperbacks. This book is about a group of 5 girls and their families growing up in a slum in Bangalore that's about to be destroyed by the government. And the opening scene is the bulldozers coming in to destroy their houses. And there's a paragraph in the scene that's actually a list poem I wrote that then became a paragraph in the book. And I basically did this exercise to write this paragraph. So I'm just going to read it to you now to tie it back to the book. Ragged jigsaw of tilted tents, angry quilt of rusted roofs, maze of sagging sofas, muddy monsoon squelch, dry summer hum, jangle and clatter of gunshot tongues firing words faster than Rajni fires bullets. That's where we're from. People who aren't from here, they think beauty is country colors. Rice paddy green, peacock neck blue, sunsets gold and purple and pink. No one writes poems about pavement gray, road roller yellow, or AC bus red. People who aren't from here can't see past the signs stuck in the ground 30 years ago. Swargahali, it once said. English letters straight like soldiers, Kannada letters curved like destiny. Now it's been split in 2, cracked by one of the bulldozers the city sent to erase us the first time, or maybe the second or the third. After a while, we stopped counting. All that's left is the word Swarga. Swarga, people ask, as in Sanskrit for heaven, this place? Heaven, we say with them, this place? Sometimes they laugh. Sometimes we do too, but most of the time we don't. Because the sign isn't right, but it's not wrong either. So thank you guys for participating. I wanted to read that last part just to show that these list poems can become more than just poems. They can become parts of books. They can become the start of stories, or they can just become a thing you do to help yourself stay sane in our country right now. So there's lots of ways to use them. So now I think we have a little bit of time for questions, and I just want to say I can answer questions about this exercise. I can answer questions about the book. I can't answer what is going to happen to us, but other than that, I can answer whatever questions you guys have. And Leslie, do you want them to put it in the chat, or is it okay if people just ask? How do you want to do it?
I think either way, chat or unmute.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I really like this book, and I like how it does talk about a lot of complex issues, especially like gender discrimination and caste discrimination. And I think that I've witnessed a tendency amongst American audiences to consider those like only like Indian problems, and to kind of like this might be the only exposure that students have to India. And so that might lead to some generalization. And I was just wondering, what advice do you have for like prefacing the book, as well as encouraging students to take this as one story, and as Slums as one piece of India, and not generalize to all of India?
But first of all, I'm really thankful that you enjoyed the book. Thank you for saying that. And that's a really, really great question. And I have to say, like, when I was on book tour 2 years ago, when this book first came out, somebody asked me if I had written the book in English or if I had written it in Indian. Someone asked me why the girls don't all move to the US. Clearly, they don't have any family who are immigrants, because I've gone through the immigration process with like 3 family members. And if it were that easy to come to the US. So yeah, I mean, there is always that there is always that risk when you put work out there that people are just going to take it in one way. So what I try to do in those situations is I try to sort of provide other kind of background material. So I have students read about caste. Leslie's made an amazing PowerPoint, by the way, which Leslie, is it in the folder that Carmen made?
It will be shared probably about a week after today. Yeah.
Okay.
Just to give some like political background information.
Yeah, and it's got all kinds of things. It's got stuff about like the LGBT movement in India. It's got stuff about like water rights, like pretty much a lot of the stuff that's in the book. I think another thing that I would ask students to do is to think a little bit about the way they've been represented in the past and whether that is the whole story of their sort of existence. So there's one thing I do with my writing students who are adults, where I have them watch, and this might not be the best kind of thing for like K through 12, but Laverne Cox has this great documentary out called Disclosure right now that's about trans representation in media. And there's like a YouTube link which I can find and I can send Carmen and Leslie to send you guys, where she talks about why she made the film. I think high school students would understand it. She uses big words and it's a little bit complex what she's saying. But she talks about how she made this because she felt like she wasn't being represented and the ways in which she was being represented were not like part of her life. And so what I usually do is I have a discussion about that, and then I have students reflect on the parts of themselves that have been and have not been represented and how they have been represented. So sometimes having that kind of reflection will help students realize that, you know, this isn't the only like thing that could happen. So yeah.
I felt like you presented a diversity of young women's experiences that helped. And then I was thinking too, to address Priyanka's question, I think like when I teach and we're reading about another place, let's say we're reading about gender discrimination in another place, then I ask them, well, what does gender discrimination look like where you live? Or if we're reading about trans rights, if we're reading about, poverty or inequality, then I kind of try to reverse I try to bring in the comparison question. That helps a little bit.
I love that. That's so good because like, I mean, we're having water problems here in the US too. Like in Colorado, we've had a drought for the past 5 years because of climate change, you know? A lot of the issues in the book are very similar here. And in India, trans people are obviously, persecuted in a lot of ways, but there's also like, the census has 4 gender categories in India. And you can get an ID in India that says trans. Like you can't get that here in the United States. So there are certain ways in which, some of these countries are actually ahead of the US. And, if you do a little research, you might be able to figure that out too. But it's a great question. And I don't know if there's a good answer for it because I have grownups do that all the time. So. Does anyone else have questions?
It's not really a question, but it's just a thought, about being careful about single story. And your book is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, for sharing your writing with the world. But it's a launching pad. I mean, I was curious about things I didn't know about before, and now I'll go and look into those things. So I think just remember to show our students that this is a springboard for looking at things that you're curious about, that you want to explore further.
Thank you. That's great to hear.
I kind of want to, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is working. Okay. Just kind of springing off what Carly said. Whenever I'm going to teach for the first time this semester, I'm a master's student. I got an associate instructorship, so I'm like, this is a writing and teaching space. I'm doing this. Okay. I think what I like reminding people is there's always more than what you know. So keep your mind open and feel free to ask questions. And I hope you feel safe enough to ask questions. Because I think it's a consistent thing, and it's a good thing to try to develop that mindset of there's more, that there's a way, like it's kind of there's a word for it. Oh my God. You guys know that mentality that's good for growth, the one where you learn from your mistakes, and because of that, you're able to like go further than someone who just kind of just reaches growth mindset. Yes, thank you for the comment. Yeah. So this kind of helps with that. And people will be more eager and interested in hearing other people's stories and perspectives, even if they don't agree with it. So,
Good point.
Yeah.
And congratulations. That's exciting. So Leslie's wrote, I felt as a reader, I was like the photographer, and that was uncomfortable, but gave me so much to think about. So there's a character in the book who's a white photographer who comes in and sort of tries to save the girls in the book, and that's not really what happens. And it's really, the photographer is such an interesting character to me because I basically wrote it based on my experiences of my first few months going in as a researcher. Because I'm American, I'm Indian, and I spoke the language, and I'm married to a man who grew up in Bangalore and all of that stuff, who gave me a lot of street cred. Apparently I learned that he can swear very well in Kannada. This is something I didn't know about him until he came and hung out with me at some of the research sites. But the photographer was based on sort of me bubbling around, but it was also based on something that I sort of did and experienced while I was there. So when I first moved to Bangalore, I moved there in like November of 2012, and in January, one of the biggest slums in Bangalore was destroyed, and it was also one of the oldest slums. So this was 2013, and the slum had been erected in 1983, which meant that in Bangalore, which is rapidly urbanizing, it was the oldest structure in that area, even though it was like a temporary settlement. So there was this wonderful woman, she was a German photographer, and she went and she took pictures of a demolition. And her lens was very sort of like apocalyptic and catastrophic. And she showed her photographs at this gallery that my friend had opened. So he hosted her photographs. And one of the reasons she took this lens is because she was trying to get people to engage in activism around the slum and to protest the demolition, and she was very successful at that. But then when I was working, when I was doing my ethnography, I made friends with a bunch of the teachers, and they were like, well, I mean, we could take pictures of the slums, like we live here and our families are here and this is the people we love. So they ended up doing a photo exhibition, which was very, at my friend's gallery, at the same gallery where this had been shown. And it was really, really cool and really amazing. And so that's why sort of photography was on my mind, because their pictures, like her pictures were all like sepia toned, and there were like half-dressed kids in rubble. And these teachers' pictures were these like beautiful, happy, smiling kids. In fact, I have some. Do you guys want to see some of the pictures? Because I have some of them. Okay, let me share my screen here. So this is at the opening. So these are the photographers, and they're all preschool teachers in India. And so these are some of the pictures that they took. This is actually the character this is the picture that inspired, if you've read the book, Deepa's mother is a seamstress. And there were all these women who would sit outside their homes sewing and would just spy on all the kids and report back on everything that they've done. So this picture was one of the sort of like inspirations for that. And you can see the bright colors, you can see the people smiling, and like, you know, this is not a great place to live, but you can see that there's joy and movement and happiness in that picture. These are pictures of interiors of the home. So these are two young mothers. This mother has recently moved to the slum, and this mother has been there a while. So you can see she has like shelves full of stuff, and her wall is decorated, and she's got, you know, she's like basically set up a home. Which again, for me, was interesting to think about, like, what's a temporary resident, what's a permanent one. These are some of the students at the preschool, and as part of the anti-malnutrition policy there, they gave out free eggs. So these kids are sitting eating their eggs. And then you can see a preschool classroom in the background. Lego gave like free blocks to the preschoolers. And so this is them playing, and all these kids live in the nearby slums. And I love this picture because it's so colorful and full of joy, and it's just like kids playing with blocks, you know? And these photos are also in your folder if you want to share them. This is what a school compound looks like. So the preschool is right here, and then this is the government school. And there's like a community garden back here, and these are just kids playing in the courtyard. This picture I like to show because it just shows how diverse Bangalore is. So this woman is hijabi, as you can see, so she's Muslim. This woman, women who wear nighties are generally Christian. And then these two, this is the teacher, and then this woman is Hindu, but she's actually from northern India, a different region. And all of these people are living like in the same area. Also, I'm just like obsessed with scooters and motorcycles, so I like the picture. And then I think this is the last one. This is a picture of the inside of the school, and I just love the angle and like the light and everything in it. And these are some coloring pages the kids did. So basically I just showed those to say that the photographer was definitely, became like one of the most popular characters, but I added her afterwards as part of like, my editor wanted me to add a through line to some of the pieces. But then she became the character that a lot of people related to the most. So that's like her backstory.
Just ask a question. I know you keep using the word slum, and as like a white lady from Wisconsin who hasn't gone very far, like
Yeah.
I don't know, like is that a term that I don't know. I guess just if you could speak a little bit on your use of that term.
Yeah, so it's a government sanctioned term, and it's a very specific term. There have to be a certain number of houses in a certain area. There's two kinds of slums in India. There's notified slums and non-notified slums. So in notified slums, there's usually like a central kind of like toilet area. Two of the slums I worked in had multiple government schools because they were sanctioned. So the sort of like non-notified slums are the ones that are more recent usually. And they're also the ones that tend to get destroyed. So the government doesn't like want to notify them. Basically.
Is that where you were kind of mentioned in the back of the book about like the maps where it was like, oh, there's nothing here, so it can be developed because, okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what that is. So the non-notified ones, but actually one of the notified ones was also not on the map. So I don't even know if it's still there anymore. But the reason I feel comfortable using that term is people who live in the area also refer to it as the slum. So they have sort of like adapted that term. They've like reclaimed that term as what they call their neighborhood. Yeah. Yeah, and I think in the book there's a reference to the Slum Clearance Board, which is the name of the authority over slums, which is also really chilling because the authority over slums is called the Place to Clear Slums. And that's real. There's like a huge slum, as you come into Bangalore from the villages, there's like a huge slum authority building.
I just had a thought. So I'm from Kenya. I'm an international student. I was here when I was younger. So being in the US again just feels like being at home. Slums might be taken in a negative way by many people, but when you actually go in, it's just taken as like an adjective or a noun for the place itself. Like, yeah, I live in this section. Like there's a name for the area. And it's like, oh yeah, it's a slum. Like there's no negative connotation per se. I mean, that's just very interesting. It's very socially constructed. There's a lot into this.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my experience in India too, actually. And now that you mention it, like I think slum is something that in the West, I never really thought about it until you mentioned it. In the West, we think of it as something really bad, but it's just like the term for neighborhoods there. So yeah, informal housing or informal settlements. Thank you, Leslie. That also works as a term.
I think they're just interesting questions about how do we teach students who are living in the US about other countries, right? And about poverty in other countries. And so Mademoiselle Sparks, your question raised that for me. And I think it's a really important question. And words like slums are kind of keywords for us to problematize that. And like somebody was mentioning earlier, Priyanka, how do we, also turn that lens back on ourselves about the incredible poverty that exists in our country where people, don't have access to sanitation and water. And so lots of that, being careful about terms and reversing the gaze maybe, I think is necessary.
Yeah, and I think also just saying that like these places are people's homes, like so my first book is actually a middle grades book about a girl who grows up in a slum based on some of the girls that I hung out with when I was doing my field work. And these girls didn't want to leave their slum. They just wanted like running water and electricity, So it's like these places are people's homes and it's not fair the way that they live, but that doesn't mean that they're like terrible places. There's like kids grow up there and people fall in love there and people, sorry, I just saw the chat. Zoom is like so distracting. So, even if it's not fair that people don't have access to like decent housing, but like people can make homes everywhere. So to be condescending about a place that isn't, up to par, I think, one of my big goals with the book is when I was doing ethnographies there in slums, I was like, oh, these people are going to be so miserable. And they're not. Like, they want better places to live, but like, they have wonderful communities and neighborhoods and families just like we do. Abby, do you want to talk about the SDG? the SDGs?
Sure. So that's actually what brought me to this. I'm in an SDG book club through IU University Center of Change, or Indiana Universities, I should say. I teach in Indiana. I use the SDGs in my biology classes as the framework for all the biology content that I have to teach. So the creative writing side of me, like I'm vigorously taking notes from all the things that you're saying as I learn to look at this from a different lens. But I use the SDGs as my lens to solve these wicked problems that we keep talking about. And I have a lot of students who participate in what's called the World Food Prize, which is this huge research paper, right? So technical writing, again, something I'm great at, but it's just really a good lens, or it's changed my entire kind of teaching perspective. And that's when I started using books. Like my freshman biology class read The Bitter Side of Sweet by Tara Sullivan this last semester to drive the unit on ecology. And I was able to teach all about Mali and Cote d'Ivoire, and had some people come in. So, you know, I'm not sure where all of you teach or how you teach, but the SDGs are just a phenomenal resource for bringing in and solving these kind of really tough questions that I hear us asking. And yeah, that's what I have.
Thank you. And I'm seeing in the chat that Danielle has said a great resource for teaching the SDGs is the world's largest lesson. And for language teachers, the resources are in many different languages. Leslie, how much time do we have?
I'm gonna let Carmen answer if Carmen's
okay
available. 17
minutes. Okay. Okay, great. That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure.
I thought it ends at 6:30 because I saw 2 different times in 2 different places. So
certainly if anyone needs to log off, feel free to do that at any point. Yeah, absolutely. Are there other questions for Mathu?
I have another question if others don't. I would love to hear so I think like the character development for the 5 girls and their mothers is really strong. But then there's also like brothers in the background who we kind of don't hear a lot about. And I was just wondering, like, what made you kind of choose to keep the brothers kind of in the periphery when, like, of course, like your siblings are probably pretty central to your life. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. And Fernando, I see your hand. So as soon as I finish talking, we'll get your question too. So I actually wrote an article about this for Miss Magazine. It was a very conscious choice for me to move men to the back of the story. And this is the question I get the most at book clubs is like, where are all the men? The majority of books about slums in India are about boys and men, and women's stories are rarely told. So part of it was a political act to just center the women and to refer to the men only in reference to their relationships to the women. So many of the men don't have names. Many of the men, like Deepa's father is just Deepa's father, and Padma's brothers are just Padma's brothers. Because I really wanted to highlight the way that women are treated in novels. So if you think of novels about slums, I mean, if you think about White Tiger, there's not a single woman in the whole book. If you think about Slumdog Millionaire, there's one woman and she's the love interest and she gets acid thrown in her face. And you know, even if you look beyond literature about slums, in like in Moshe Hamid's book, How to Get Filthy Rich in Asia, he's got a central female character who's a love interest who he doesn't name the whole book. So, you know, I just wanted to give that treatment to men. And then I also, the other reason that I had them in the background is because when I was doing ethnographies, the men were in the background. I mean, most poor women, most poor people in the world are women. Most poor people in the world are mothers. Most poor people in the world are single mothers. That's true here in the US, that's true throughout Asia. And when I was doing my field work, if I saw men, they were either playing cards and drunk, or they were like at work as an auto driver or something like that, or they were sleeping at home. Like, it was the women who ran everything. Most of the women worked. So I really just wanted to show that centrality in the book, because that is the reality in slums, and that's not what you see, you know, in a lot of literature. And then I can actually paste the article I wrote if you guys are interested. Because the other thing that was happening around the time that I wrote this book is that the government in India had just published a report saying that there were, oh, thanks, Carmen, saying that there were 63 million women missing from the Indian population. So that meant, according to statistical projections, there should have been 63 million more women than were alive. And that's because of female infanticide. That's because girls are denied nutrition and girls are forced to go to work early. And so they have shorter lifespans. So in this piece, I sort of talk about how I read that report while I was reading this. And I was like, well, we do exist, like Indian women are here, you know, even though you don't want us to be. And so this piece is sort of about how that was very much on my mind as I was writing the book. So thank you for that question. Fernando, I think you had your hand up, right? Oh, Priyanka, sorry, did you want to say something?
I just said thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. No problem. Fernando, go ahead.
I hope I'm wording this question right, but so I read about other authors and how they try to commit to an idea, saying how they have to remind themselves that they care about it, they like it so much, what have you. I guess I wonder, how is it different when you're writing about what you consider an invisible community?
So how is it different to write about an invisible community, or how is it different to commit to the idea?
Commit to the idea.
Okay, so the invisibility, that's a great question, by the way, thank you. The invisibility of the community was part of the reason I felt very committed to the idea. So a philosopher who I really love, I don't know if she's a philosopher, she's like a feminist theorist. I'll put it in the chat. Her name is Chandra Mohanty. And she is a South Asian feminist writer who was writing when I was in grad school and isn't doing very much now, I don't think. But she wrote about how one of the ways to show solidarity with people is to amplify their stories and to amplify their voices. And that doesn't mean to like take their voice away, but just to like write or talk or show what you see is happening. And so the fact that I had never read a book like the book that I wrote, like I've read lots of books about slums in India. And in fact, there are like 3 that are out this year that are doing quite well. But those books don't have central women characters, and they don't talk about the invisibility of women in sort of Indian society. And that's something I've always been interested in. And I also had a very like personal interest in it as well, because, you know, I am Indian. I'm elite, but my family grew up next to these communities. I was living in like a really posh neighborhood in Bangalore, and I was walking distance from all these slums. Like one of the slums was behind this 5-star hotel called the Leela. One of the slums was behind this brand new hospital that was like super fancy and had just been built. So some of the richest places in Bangalore bordered these slums. So for me, it was just something I was always interested in, and it felt very politically motivated to write about a community that's invisible, but was just so there. So I hope does that answer your question?
It's pretty close. I guess then, was it hard then to make other people, not make, but like to show this to other people and have them understand?
Yeah, you know, the thing about writing a book is you kind of put it out there and you just sort of like hope people are going to understand. But I don't really know if people got everything that I wanted to do with the book, but I do know that I'm happy that at least this story is out there, and I guess I can only hope, you know, to get people to understand what I would like them to. But also part of the thing about writing a work of fiction or any book is that you kind of have to let go once it's out in the world, you know, because you can't be there while someone is reading a book, right? It's very different than like a musical performance. So it's like a very different kind of form of art. I guess it's like visual art that way. You can't control people's interpretations. You can only hope that they understand like the sincerity with which you wrote it and the intention. But it's a really good question. And it's one of the hardest things about being a writer, I think.
Thank you.
Are any of you guys aspiring writers by any chance? Does anybody write in their free time? Oh, I see one hand. A few people, nice. What do you guys write? Do you write fiction or nonfiction or poetry or? I see another yes.
a little bit of
Fiction and
everything,
poetry.
but mostly for myself.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Carly. Can you say it again?
A little bit of everything, but mostly for myself. But
Nice.
nonfiction is the direction I'm going in, but fiction to kind of, I don't know, it inspires some of that too. I don't know.
Nice. That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, I actually never thought this book was going to be published. I was writing for myself too. And then I submitted a couple of his stories. I had never had any luck. Like, well, I published one book through like a small feminist press in India that ended up doing pretty well, which was nice. But I submitted a couple of these short stories to contests. And then one of the contests was judged by an agent, and the agent was like, hey, can I represent you? And I was like, oh, maybe this actually has some like momentum. Because I've been writing like since I was 5, and I've applied to agents. I think this last round where I actually found my agent, I had applied like 4 times without getting any bites. So it's definitely good if you're writing for yourself, because getting published is like a whole thing. But I think one of the reasons the book felt good to me is because I wrote it for me. I didn't think there would be an audience for it, which is why your question was so interesting, Fernando. Is like, because I never thought anyone would read the book, so I didn't really think about my intentions. And then suddenly it was out in the world, and I had to like think more about how people were interpreting it. Thank you. I'm lucky to have my agent too. She's really great.
Did that make it difficult then to have to think about your work once more and how questions you might receive about it?
So that's an interesting question. It not necessarily. I think what's made it more difficult is that the project I'm working on now, I feel a lot of pressure. And I'm definitely in a different place now than when I wrote this book, because I wrote this book. I mean, it took me 6 years to write. And then after I wrote it, it took like a year for it to come out. So that's almost 10 years ago now. But I did feel a lot of pressure for the next book to come out quickly and just as soon. And then, 2020 happened, and I was like, I'm gonna just write for myself. And if this book comes out, it does. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. Because, but being an author is a very weird thing. I have to say, it's not what I thought it would be. So. Oh, Leslie, you guys don't have to raise your hands. Like,
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was really interested in how the book weaves in a lot of social, political, economic questions and issues into the background. And I wonder if you want to talk with us about that process of balancing like social science and art is how I saw it as I was reading.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of really great works of literature, which I don't know if this book counts as that, but a lot of really great works of literature do that. I think especially writers who are marginalized in some way, it's really hard to tell a story without telling the story of everything that's affecting you and your life. And these stories, a lot of them were inspired just by like everyday things that I saw happening. And when I showed up at my field site every morning, everybody was at the water tank and water pump and talking. So it felt weird to write the story without having those kind of moments in there. And everybody was always worried about water and talking about, we lived in a really fancy neighborhood, and we were always worried about water. Like when I moved from Bangalore to Delhi, my daughter was like 2, and we went 10 days without water, and we lived in like a really rich neighborhood. So I think some of it just felt very natural. And I also just think it's really, it's hard to tell a good story without understanding the social context. Like when I think about a lot of the work that's coming out now, I'm trying to think of some stuff that I read. So I'm in the middle of reading Louise Erdrich's book, The Night Watchman, which is about, it takes place on a Native American reservation. And Louise Erdrich is Chippewa. So like and like people in the book are always hungry, and people in the book are always worried that the government is going to come and take away their land. And that to me just feels like that's the story of those people. That's like what they go through and where they live every day, So I think that the social science part of it, and I think the reason that I wrote fiction with so many details in it is because it was really hard for me to process. I don't know if you'll relate to this. It was really hard for me to process what I was seeing through academic papers. It just didn't feel like you could capture the same level of nuance and the layers in an academic format. And composite characters and stories that took place in this context just seemed like, I don't know, I wrote like, you know, I think I wrote 4 papers about my project, and this book feels more real than any of them and more true. So yeah. And I think it also depends on like what feels good to you to write. Like to me, fiction has always felt really good to write and feels like what I'm best at. So it felt like the most effective way to tell a story.
Any other questions for Mathu?
I have one last one if no one else does. So I was very like almost surprised and very touched by the generosity in the book, especially amongst, you know, people that do not have very much in terms of material possessions, and thinking like reflecting on myself, like would I offer to watch my neighbor's kids for them every single day like Chandra Mohanty does? And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about like that, just like the generosity between the characters.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I witnessed a lot of this and a lot of sort of people taking care of each other, but I think it's a couple things. I think India is a very collective kind of society, which is in instances like this, it's really great because people sort of come together and take care of each other because you can't really survive on your own. So there's a lot of like, I know if I help my neighbor, they're going to help me. And a lot of also sort of like, if I don't have anyone to watch my kids, I can't work and my kids can't eat. So I just have to kind of figure out a way. I think the downside of that sort of collective is, which I don't know how much you see in the book, but that people's sort of individuality is often sort of snuffed out, and women especially are expected to carry, I think this is very much in the book, are expected to carry a huge emotional load and care load. And the only way to really do it is to share responsibilities. And I think, at least for me, like I have a very sort of close group of friends who are all over the country now, and we all take care of each other in our own way. But the pandemic had really shown me how much I rely on other people, because that was just cut off, right? So I think different societies have these communities in sort of different ways. And I also wanted to write an optimistic book because I was just like, I mean, the first draft of This Slum Gets Destroyed, and I was like, I've read that story so many times. You know, I don't want to write that story. And also I was watching, I mean, I didn't go to demolitions, but I went to protests, and I went to, you know, union rallies, and I saw women standing up for themselves, and I saw women filing state orders so that their slums didn't get destroyed, right? And I had never seen that in a book. And that is also something that happens. Like slums get destroyed, but also they get protected. So it was really important to me to have an optimistic ending, because I didn't want to write another sort of like, oh, the poor South Asian victim women, somebody please save us, you know? So that was also a very conscious decision.
Any final questions for Mathu?
Where can we find out about your next book when you know? No, I'm serious. Like before I Google you, do you have like your own author page, or is this just something? Okay,
I
good.
do. Yeah,
Okay,
the department's going to share with you. And I also just wanted to put in, so I'm putting it there. I also just wanted to put in a plug. I teach, but I especially wanted to put in a plug that I'm teaching on the 27th, which is 2 weeks from now, an online class on how to write op-eds. And I think now is a really, really important time to get your voice out there. And you guys are all educators. So to me, your voice is like 300 times more important than half the people who are writing. So if any of you are interested in that class, it's going to be on my website. And I have friends who are willing to I mean, it's $35, but I have friends who are willing to cover your fee. So let me know. I've taught the class 2 or 3 times now, and every single time at least one person has written an opinion piece. there's a lot happening and your words really matter. So if you're interested, I just do want to put a plug in for that, and you can find the details on my website.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Subramanian. We really appreciate your work and the time you've taken to speak with us today. We want to reserve you. We want to be your first book club for your next book. Just putting that out there. And to all of the educators who dropped in today, thank you so much for your time. The world has changed while we've been here together for this hour and a half. So we appreciate all the work you all are doing in the midst of multiple crises. Carmen is going to put in the chat, has put in the chat some of our next events in case any of those interest you. We hope to see you again for one of those. Be well, take care, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you all so much. This was so great.